Welcome to Candid Conversation. I was asked a question in Matthew 10 verse 5. Jesus commanded them not to go to the way of the Gentiles and Samaritans. Yet Samaria was part of Israel. Why did he tell them, do not go to the Samaritans? He says, but only go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Judah is the southern part of Israel. There are 2 tribes there. Then there are the 10 northern tribes of Israel. And Samaria is the capital of the 10 northern tribes. So he says, go. He sends them out. He gives them the ability to do miracles, sign gifts, and preach the gospel of the kingdom. So they will see that the gospel of the kingdom is true. They do the sign gifts. And he says, don't go to the Gentiles, don't go to the Samaritans, but rather go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So by definition, then what that means is that the lost sheep of the house of Israel must not be in Samaria, is the answer to that. Early on, before this commandment, in John chapter 4, it says that Jesus and the disciples are going somewhere, and it says about Jesus, he must needs go through Samaria. He must go through Samaria. Why? Well, it was because he is sent. He says in Matthew 15:24, I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So he's sent to Israel, and the northern tribes, Samaria, the 10 northern tribes are Jews as well. And so he has to go to where the Jews are. If you're going to get Jews saved, you got to go to where the Jews are. But in John 4, what happens is he goes there, and he doesn't get to talk to anybody except a woman, which really the woman isn't supposed to be the leader. She's not supposed to usurp authority over the man. So he doesn't get to talk to a man. So that's not good, because the man would then teach the other men. So if you're going to start to reach, you can't reach every single person there. So what you do is you'd find people who listen, who want to believe the gospel, so that they may be saved, and then they can reach other people there. But he has to start with a woman. The woman goes back and tells people that she knows, and then she says, is not this the Christ? So she believes, it seems like. And then it says that many believed on him because of what the woman said. And then it says they wanted him to stay with them. And so Jesus stayed with the Samaritans 2 days. That's in John 4, verses 39 through 42. John 4, 39 through 42. And it says, many believed on him, that he stayed with them 2 days. And then he left. Well, so it sounds like, okay, so there are believers in Samaria, so why wouldn't you go to Samaria? Well, in John 2, that was John 4, in John 2, Jesus talks about when he goes to Jerusalem. John 2, 23 through 25. John 2, 23 through 25, one of my favorite passages of Scripture. It says, many believed in his name when they saw the miracles he did. But he did not commit himself unto them. And you think, well, why not? Well, he knows what is in the heart of man. And what is in the heart of man predominantly is religion. And that's where the Samaritans come in. Why? He told them in Matthew 10 not to go to the Samaritans. Because if you go down, if you remember what Jesus said in John 4 to the woman, she immediately turns to her religion. She says, well, our fathers say that you need to worship on this mountain over here in Samaria, but your fathers say that you should worship in Jerusalem. You see, you can tell she's not looking for the truth for her to say that. The way you're saved is you recognize your sin and you believe the gospel that God gives you. And so what she does is she's not recognizing her sin. She's talking to him and saying, oh, well, But you can't really be the Messiah because we worship over here in Samaria and you worship in Jerusalem. So right away we know you can't be the Messiah. Basically what the Samaritans did, how it all started when the kingdom was divided, was that Jeroboam, the first king of Israel with the split, the divided kingdom, doesn't want people going down to Jerusalem. That's where God dwelt. You had to go to the temple in Jerusalem where God was. He doesn't want people going down there because if they do, well, then they might stop going to Samaria. They'll move down to Jerusalem. They'll move down to Judah, so they'll be closer, because the males had to appear before the Lord 3 times a year in Jerusalem. So why would you live in Israel when it's a different country? Why not move to Jerusalem? It'd be a lot easier. And so he builds 2 golden calves, and he puts one in the northern part of northern Israel, and he puts one in the southern part of northern Israel, and tells people, well, it's too hard for you to go down to Jerusalem, just worship here and go before one of these calves. And so he creates a religion, and that's what the Samaritan woman goes after. She says, she doesn't go to, well, I'm a sinner and I need a savior. She goes back to her religion and says, well, our religion says that we worship on this mountain, but your religion says you worship in Jerusalem. So she's comparing religions, basically saying, well, this can't be the Messiah because he's not following the religion. And then he says, woman, the time will come when you're not going to worship here, you're not going to worship in Jerusalem. And then he says, well, go tell your husband, because really we don't want a woman to usurp authority over the man, so go tell your husband and get him to come over here, and I'll explain these things to him. In other words, we got to overcome religion here. But what she says is, well, I don't have a husband. And Jesus says, well, technically you're correct because you've had 5 husbands, and the man you're living with now is not your husband. So now she says, whoa, wait a minute here. How did he know this stuff? Okay, maybe he is the Messiah. So it's all based on emotions. So she goes back and tells people and says, hey, I met this guy and he told me everything I did. Isn't this the Messiah? And so then they ask him to stay for 2 days, and many believe on him. But it's because of the miracles that he's doing. But when it comes back down to it, they're not going to stick with him because they're not going to get out of their religion. Just like in John 2, Jesus mentions going to the feast in Jerusalem, and many believed on him when they saw the miracles he did. The problem is that man operates in his flesh. And what man will do is he'll make man the authority over what God in his word says. And when you do that, that's when you split with people. Paul talks about, mark those who cause divisions contrary to the doctrine that you've been taught. A lot of people think that you need to split with Christians over behavior. Behavior can be rooted in bad doctrine, and so then maybe the behavior shows you bad doctrine and you split. But really you split because of bad doctrine. Behavior, if you split over bad behavior, then you'll never have fellowship with anybody because everybody sins. Now, some may do worse societal sins, but a sin is a sin in God's eyes, and everybody sins every day. No matter how good you are, you sin because no one is good, only God is, and so you use your sin nature, your vile flesh, and you end up sinning every day. And so if you split due to behavior, where do you draw the line? Well, you'd have to draw it at holiness, where no one's sinning at all. And since people sin, then you'd have to split with everybody. A bad thought, a bad look, hatred without a cause. Okay, you're gone. Lusting after somebody who's not your wife. Okay, you're gone. I can't have fellowship with you. You split over doctrine. And the problem is that man is just in his nature to try to get along with other people, which in a way is good because that's how society keeps functioning. if man behaved like Christians behave, then you wouldn't have any friends. You wouldn't have anybody, because society would just crumble, because people would split over the least little things based upon behavior. But what man does is he stays together, and he makes man as his authority. So it's like whatever the teacher says goes, we're going to go with that. You ever seen today where you'll have somebody like a Charlie Kirk or somebody who'll go to a college campus? Ray Comfort is a believer who does it. Charlie Kirk is a political guy who does it. I don't know if he's saved or not. But anyway, they go to these college campuses, and things that are blatantly obviously true, a man is a man and a woman is a woman, and they'll talk about things like that. And like the college students have no, they say, well, a man can choose to be a woman if he feels like it, or a woman can choose to be a man if she feels like it, and we got to use the right personal pronouns. And they cannot debunk the logic of a Charlie Kirk or a Ray Comfort, because they're giving truth. But they're still not going to believe what you say, because they've been brainwashed by school all the way from birth to, from 4 years old, kindergarten, all the way up to college now. They've been brainwashed to believe lies. And so to abandon the lies and believe the truth, well, then they got to abandon the system that they've been under. I mean, you're in college. If you're going to believe that a man is a man and a woman is a woman, well, now how are you going to pass your classes? How are you going to get your degree? And now you've got this debt. And what are your parents going to say? What are your friends going to say? More importantly, in college, you care about your friends. What's your boyfriend going to say? Your girlfriend going to say? And so people, even though they can't refute the truth that a man is a man and a woman is a woman, they're still going to believe the lies of the system that they're in, because that's where their comfort is. And to go out on a limb and believe whatever the truth is means going against friends and family, society, risking losing stuff. And they're too prideful and too selfish to do that. So they're too prideful in that they don't want to admit that they were wrong and been lied to and brainwashed all these years. And they're too selfish in that they don't want to lose their stuff. Relationships, good paying job, college degree, whatever it is. And so it's obvious that what a Ray Comfort or a Charlie Kirk is saying is the truth, but they can't refute it, but they will refuse to believe it because they won't go against the system. And that's what's really going on with the Samaritans. Their nation, when the kingdom was divided, was rooted in a false religious system where you worship these golden calves, and that's your God. So you've abandoned all logic. The God who brought you out of Egypt, it's not these golden calves. Well, the golden calves represent God. No, they don't. They represent the devil. If you study it out and look for the truth, you're going to abandon that religion. And then you wouldn't be in Samaria anymore, because they're steeped in that religion. So Jesus, and the problem with Judaism is they're steeped in that religion too. So, Jesus says, don't go to the way of the Samaritans, go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Well, Jerusalem is also a place where they shouldn't go. Because Jesus they have to go there because that's where the feasts are. But they're not going to reach people with the gospel. Look at what Jesus does. When John the Baptist, Matthew 4 verse 12 says that when John was cast in prison, Jesus left Judea and he went to Galilee. And his ministry from the end of Matthew 4 to the beginning of Matthew 19, I think it was, his entire ministry there, not the very first and not the very end, was in Galilee. And Matthew 4 calls it, in verse 16 and 17, somewhere in there, Galilee of the Gentiles. And now it is Naphtali and Zebulun, it's tribes of Israel, but they're called Galilee of the Gentiles because they don't follow the religion of the Jews. They don't follow the Samaritan religion, and they don't follow Judaism. They are just pagan heathen people. And so Jesus says, hey, we can reach them, because I went to the Samaritans and they're asking me religious questions. You have to start with recognizing your sin in order to even believe the gospel. And then once you believe the gospel, then you can get sound doctrine. But they aren't interested. When Jesus went to Samaria in John chapter 4, they were not interested in the truth, recognizing their sin. They were interested in maintaining the status quo of their religion. The woman doesn't recognize her sin. Jesus says to her, well, if you knew who he asked you would have asked of him and he would have given you living water. And he doesn't really, he tries to explain, well, the living water I give you, you'll never thirst again. But the conversation is like she's not interested. She's not interested because she hasn't recognized that she needs living water. In other words, when he says you would have asked the living water, what he's saying is you need to recognize your sin. You need to recognize you need God, that you can't do it with your Samaritan religion. And the only reason that she says, oh, well, this must be the Messiah, because look, he knows of what I did and everything. And the reason when she goes back and the men say, oh, yeah, that must be this Messiah, stay with us. And he stays with them, and many believe on him. It's because of the same reason that those people in John 2 in Jerusalem believed on him. It said in John 2, verses 23 through 25, they believed on him when they saw the miracles that he did. They're going by emotions. Their religion has taught them not to go. Because if you're believing Satan's lie program, you can't go by truth. You have to go by lies. And so, which means James 3:15. James 3:15 says, the wisdom of this world is devilish, and it's sensual. It's based upon the senses or the emotions. And so the response in John 4 to Jesus is the same as the response of the Samaritans, is the same as the response of those in Jerusalem in John 2. It is one of emotions. So they see Jesus knows the Samaritan woman's life. He told me everything I ever did. Can't this be the Messiah? She's basing that on emotion. She's not basing it on truth. She didn't go back and say, well, he mentioned I needed living water. And I am a sinner, and I don't see this religion that we're in helping me out of this situation. So why don't we ask him about this living water? And let's find out, she's not going down that route. She's going down the emotional route. It's, oh, he told me everything I've ever done. He must be the Messiah. And just like they did in Jerusalem in John 2, they believed on him when they saw the miracles that he did. But the problem is, when you get to truth, they're going to reject it. So you can think of the ones in Jerusalem. I would equate those to the Catholics, let's say. The Catholics have a established religion for a couple thousand years. They're the standard for a lot of people. Your chances of getting a devout Catholic. There are people who say they're Catholic and they rarely, if ever, go to a mass. Maybe they go on Christmas and Easter, if that, or they just tell people they're Catholic just to get off their back, but they don't really believe that stuff. Those people, obviously, they could believe the gospel. But I'm talking about a practicing Catholic, someone who goes through the whole thing. They're an altar boy. They take the first communion. They're baptized in the church. And then they just go to it on a Catholic church on a regular basis for their life. They're not going to believe the gospel. They're not going to recognize their sin and trust in Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection as atonement for their sin, because they're taught a works-based salvation. They know Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, but they know it in the context of this happens every week at the Mass, and that it is a work that I have to participate in by going up and taking the Eucharist. And so they'll agree, oh yeah, Jesus died for my sins. Absolutely, I believe that. But really they don't, because they've added works to it. They believe it only in the context of their religion. And so the Samaritans, oh yeah, they believed on Jesus. Well, no, the Jerusalem people, they believed on Jesus when they saw the miracles. But when it comes to doctrine and abandoning the traditions of the fathers for the commandments of God, they're not going to do that. So Jesus says, the lost sheep of the house of Israel are not in Jerusalem. I'm going to Galilee. And so the same thing has happened with Samaria. John 4, it says he must needs go through Samaria. And the reason is because they're Israel. He's sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. You know, Jesus says in Matthew 10 to go and to reach the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Don't go into Samaria. Don't go to the Gentiles, but rather go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. What that does is that implies then that the lost sheep of the house of Israel are not in Samaria. And Jesus has already determined that, because he went in John 4 and they didn't believe. They believed at first, but later on, they don't. Later on, Luke 9 verses 52 and 53. Luke 9, 52 and 53, it says he entered into a village of the Samaritans. So this is basically a follow-up. In John 4, he goes to Samaria, and he spends 2 days there. Many believed on him, but he knows they're steeped in their religion. They're steeped in their, in this case, I'm going to equate the Samaritans to the Baptist. They're steeped in their Baptist religion. And so he says, okay, let's see what they did. Have they abandoned their religion for the truth of God and his word? They have the Bible. They have this. Have they abandoned religion for the truth of God's word? And it says in Luke 9:53, they did not receive him because his face was though he would go to Jerusalem. So what does that mean? Well, what that means is he's supposed to go to Jerusalem 3 times a year as a male for the feasts. And so he's going to go to Jerusalem after Samaria. But the Samaritans basically say, well, that's your religion. We follow our religion. It's an us versus them thing. It's sort of like the Civil War, you know, the North versus the South. And the Southerners don't want to have anything to do with the Northerners and vice versa. The Catholics don't want to have anything to do with the Baptist. So the Samaritans say, we're Baptist. You're going to Jerusalem? That's Catholic. We're not going there. So we're not going to follow you. So they said, get out of here. They kick him out. So yeah, at first in John 4, they believed on him and wanted him for a couple days because they saw the miracles he did. They based everything on emotions and not on truth. But then when he gives them the truth is, God commanded to go to Jerusalem 3 times a year. So I'm going to Jerusalem. And they say, well, no, we go before this golden calf here. Our father, King Jeroboam, set this up. And so we're not going to follow you. You get out of here. Religion kicks out those who are not their own. And so just like Jesus in John 2 did not commit himself to the Jerusalem people, and he says, I'm not going back there anymore. Well, he has to go back 3 times a year because the law commanded, but he didn't go back there to get people saved. He went back there because God told him to. But he was going to the lost sheep of the house of Israel in Galilee. He wasn't in Samaria, and he wasn't in Jerusalem, because the Jerusalem people were steeped in Judaism, which I equated to Catholicism, and the Samaritans are steeped in their religion, which I equated to Baptist. And they're not going to abandon their religion for the truth, because their allegiance is to man rather than to God. So their allegiance is to lies. Just like those college students. It's obvious they are following lies, but they won't abandon the lies when they're told the truth, because it means abandoning their system. And we want to be liked, and we don't want to lose the things of this world. So we stick with that, even though it's wrong. So the reason Jesus said not to go to the Samaritans is because they already rejected him. They liked him at first, John 4. A lot of people know that story. But they don't know Luke 9, verses 52 and 53. They did not receive him because his face was though he would go to Jerusalem. They say, you're following the wrong religion. We won't listen to you. So Jesus said in Matthew 10, when you go to a city and they're not worthy, shake the dust off your feet. Don't go back. Go to somewhere else, because you got to keep moving. You're not going to go over all the cities of Israel before the Son of Man be come. So keep moving. And so Jesus had already rejected Samaria and Jerusalem because of their religion. They wouldn't believe the gospel. And so he tells the disciples, don't go to the Samaritans. So next time you're going to ask the question, well, why did he have them in Jerusalem in early Acts? And why did they stay there? So we'll go over that next time. Thanks for watching.